thanks a lot for joining us and joining me, actually, as we talk about this new show coming up. It's kind of countdown to Relations, Diaspora and Painting, which was supposed to open on April 22nd, and now is going to open on July 8th. And we're really looking forward to welcoming you back to the Foundation. I just wanted to let you know that we're going to be recording this session. So, please feel free to, make yourself visible and visible however you want, but we will be recording it so we can share it with others later on. And we're also going to, I would love to exchange with you if there are questions that you might have or comments or just things you want to share after. We'll have some time for that. So we'll get started. Relations is basically a group show. There are 27 artists involved, and I really wanted to look at the idea, exploration of diaspora and where it intersects with contemporary painting practices. And what I noticed in the research is that diaspora, being quite a complex term that has evolved over time, it actually is quite analogous to the proliferation of painting approaches, aesthetic languages, and methodologies that are part of contemporary art and contemporary painting today. So we'll start from the beginning. Basically, the idea of, the interest in exploring diaspora comes from a personal place. My parents are immigrants, and my father was born in Swatow, China, but grew up in Hong Kong, where his family fled during the fall of the Republic era. And my mother was born in the Philippines, located in the Western Visayas of the archipelago, but due to economic constraints, she was sent to live with her relatives in the far north. So they're no strangers to migration, and they both left their countries of origin in the 1960s in order to have a more prosperous life. So they went to the United States. They went to university in Houston, Texas. My mother found work as a nurse in Hamilton, Ontario. So she left the United States for Canada. And this was at the time when immigration rules were being relaxed as the demand for labor became more intense as Canada was making its bid to become a nation. So these kind of laws were also relaxed to allow for more people of color to enter Canada. And they eventually became Canadian citizens. My father followed my mother to Canada. And I was born in 1971, which is also interestingly, I think, is the year that Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, made multiculturalism an official policy. And I've been telling this story my whole life, and it's really informed my worldview and my sense of being and doing in the world. And of course, that would mean influencing both a kind of artistic practice and a curatorial practice. It's been a bit of a research obsession that's followed me throughout everything that I do. And I just feel really privileged to have the opportunity to explore that in a whole exhibition on painting. So why this picture? This was a photograph that was taken of me when I was 5. So I was in kindergarten, and growing up as a visible minority person in Canada in the 1970s was elucidating, in that I was very much aware of my difference vis-a-vis sort of the dominant sort of white Anglo-Saxon culture. And like so many young people who just want to fit in, I, kind of eschewed my heritages, my cultural heritages, and I wanted to show people that I was very Canadian. So I don't speak Chinese, I don't speak Tagalog, my parents' languages, And I, you know, have come to feel very saddened by that, but also empowered by my ability to negotiate many terrains at the same time, which is a kind of experience that a lot of diaspora people talk about. You know, living in more than one culture at the same time and being able to negotiate a kind of multiple cultures and ways of being at the same time. But this picture is significant because I was at a multicultural festival in the 1970s in Toronto, and there were pavilions. My father was involved as a volunteer at the Canton Pavilion, where they were having dance and food and, you know, kind of like the superficial ways that we celebrate multiculturalism. But this prop, it was a dragon. It's for a dance, a dragon dance, and it's one of the only ones that are done by women. You know, usually it's men, and also girls. So girls were carrying these poles and doing the dragon dance. And for the first time, I was really enthralled and proud of my Chinese heritage, and I really wanted to affirm and start to understand and be more connected with my Chinese heritage. Kindergarten was also the time of, you know, that awakening of awareness, you know, of who you are in Canadian society. And the fact that you know, I came into contact with ethnic slurs and comments on my appearance and bullying. And over time, it occurred to me that the utopian rhetoric of the multiculturalism policy, which is meant to affirm the value and dignity of all Canadian citizens, regardless of their racial or ethnic origins, their language, or their religious affiliation, would start to prove to be instrumental in articulating uneven power relations between immigrant others and a dominant Anglo-Saxon sort of Canadian society. Entering adulthood, I came to celebrate my mixed heritage, and I've been empowered, you know, by that experience. But, you know, sort of disillusioned by the double discourse, perhaps, of multiculturalism, and, you know, haunted by that voice, you know, that's always asking, where are you from? I began to get quite politicized by post-colonial and feminist theory, and discovered the term, concept, condition, maybe experience, called diaspora. And without a deep investigation yet, you know, into the academic and theoretical explorations, the idea of diaspora seemed to just speak to, you know, my deepest desires to engage with my heritage and resist the, at times, overwhelming desire to fit in. So carrying out research on diaspora and its condition is just, it's been central to my work for as long as I can remember. And, you know, it's very fulfilling to be able to look at these things through this exhibition. So what is, you know, diaspora? As I mentioned, it is a kind of complex term that has gone through a lot of evolution. It's, instead of just being a word, it's also expanded to be thought of as a concept, a stance, a consciousness, and I would like to offer a condition in the most positive sense. So diaspora is taken from the Greek word diasporan, which means to disperse, more precisely dia, across, and spirin, scatter. As many scholars claim, the earliest academic discussions of diaspora were grounded in the concept of a homeland, and moreover, a longing for and desire to return to that homeland. Furthermore, scholars, you know, we always want to put things in boxes. So there was a preoccupation with identifying a paradigmatic case or a few cases that would become the reference for the term. So Rogers Brubaker, for example, has, you know, explained that the paradigmatic case for a long time was the Jewish diaspora. And some dictionary definitions even have, you know, the Jewish diaspora as not just an illustration, but the definition of the word diaspora. This later branched out to include Armenian and Greek diasporas. And there were even some scholars who wanted to have like a point system, like in order to qualify as diaspora, a people had to qualify for, you know, like, I think there were almost 6 to 10 qualifiers to say, okay, yeah, you're diaspora, you're not diaspora. Historian George Shepperson introduced the idea of the African diaspora as early as 1966. And in 1976, John Armstrong threw in the term mobilized diasporas or trading diasporas, which would include Chinese, Indian, Lebanese, Baltic Germans, and the Hausa people of Nigeria. And diasporans have also been defined as those forcibly displaced from their countries of origin, including exiles, refugees, asylum seekers, and survivors of the slave trade. But diasporans also uproot themselves in pursuit of education, land, and business career opportunities. From the 1960s onwards, the idea of diaspora became mostly associated with this idea of the first generation of people who settle in a new country, but who develop the ability to skillfully negotiate its cultural terrains, but stay emotionally connected to the homeland, forming communities with others who share the same ethno-diasporic heritage. I am very interested in how diaspora has since evolved from those particular discourses, because they seem fairly narrow up until the 90s. So this is where the curatorial concept and the framework come together. It's really in the expansion of the term diaspora in the 90s with theorists such as Rogers Brubaker, James Clifford, who wrote Diaspora, Stuart Hall, of course, the great Stuart Hall cultural theorist, Avtar Bra as well. She wrote an incredible text about diaspora that is, I think, not seen and not been given enough visibility and credit for its contribution. And of course, Trinh T. Minh Ha is another theorist, writer, filmmaker, artist who I think has contributed a lot to the discussion. So these cultural theorists actually kind of liberated the term. In 1990, Stuart Hall complicated diaspora by talking about identity and how it is not fixed, always in production, and mutable. He says, quote, that diasporic identities can be defined not by essence or purity, but by the recognition of a necessary heterogeneity and diversity, by a conception of identity which lives with and through, not despite difference, but by hybridity. Diaspora identities are those which are constantly producing and reproducing themselves anew through transformation and difference, end quote. So he sees diasporic identity as mutable and informed and empowered by its difference, which produces an ability to traverse and negotiate multiple cultural terrains simultaneously. And this idea provided me with a sort of substantial, joyful way to reconcile the multiplicity of my heritage with the ambivalence of nationality. In '94, James Clifford also challenged the established definitions of diaspora with the contention that the Jewish case need not be the definitive model of diaspora, and that, quote, transnational connections linking diasporas need not be articulated primarily through a real or symbolic homeland, end quote. Rather, diasporas could share decentered lateral connections through a shared consciousness, which is entirely a product of cultures and histories in collision and dialogue. That's also from James Clifford. So in '96, Avtar Bra went a step further. She takes up Stuart Hall's idea of identity and asserts that, quote, not all diasporas sustain an ideology of return. Moreover, the multiplacedness of home in the diasporic imaginary does not mean that diasporian subjectivity is rootless. She says, I argue for a distinction between feeling at home and declaring a place as home. Processes of diasporic identity formation are exemplars par excellence of the claim that identity is always plural and in process. In other words, the concept of diaspora refers to multi-locationality within and across territorial, cultural, and psychic boundaries. So by releasing like the concept of diaspora from the idea of the longing for a homeland, which I do not have. I don't long for China and the Philippines. I am, you know, for all intents and purposes, quite Canadian, but more than that, right? So these writings provide second generation diasporas and such as the children of post-1965 wave of immigrants to countries like Canada, the ability to assert that multiplicity of their identities as part of a diasporic discourse. Trinity Minha, one of my faves, she says the multidimensional necessity of being both here's and theirs implies a more radical ability to shuttle between frontiers to cut across ethnic allegiances while assuming a specific and contingent legacy. So operating within diasporic consciousness also collapses temporality, allowing for one to exercise and be the confluence of histories, cultures, and languages that informs one's identity without negating those of the new nation state. I offer this brief overview of the evolution of the term diaspora as a way to foreground the conceptual underpinnings of the exhibition. I love how Hall and Bra contribute the liberation of diaspora discussions through a consideration also of racialization, in addition to ethnicity, class, sex, and capital, and they provide the theoretical framework from upon which this exhibition sort of, I like to say, it unrests. So this kind of idea of a multiplicity of voices is also a major underpinning for the curatorial concept. I think it's really important not to fix any definitions and to allow, you know, us to see that there are so many ways that artists are dealing with their own experiences of diaspora through their work, through their paintings in this case. And so that is really kind of, if I were to give, you know, a strategy, you know, to it, it would be a strategy of a multiplicity of voices. So the intentions, I had it in the back of my mind to organize a large-scale exhibition devoted to diasporian perspectives, but I always get overwhelmed because there's so much great work out there and across so many different media and approaches. And then our founder director said, well, why don't we do a painting show next? We should really, you know, address painting. And then I was like, maybe we can bring diaspora and painting together. And it actually seemed to work quite well in a very interesting way. A focus on painting with its historicity and Western centrism provided more of a way to, it was more than just a way to narrow the field of selection. It is a really provocative medium through which to explore diasporic consciousness in its many variations and permutations. The artist and relations demonstrate a profound awareness of the power relations of painting that have become entrenched in the canon of art history. The countless arguments about what painting is or isn't, as well as its temporality, are taken up and challenged by the proposals of many of the artists in this show. Through various richly contemplated approaches, these artists stake out and claim positions that both critique and engage with the histories of painting, exemplifying what Schwabsky has observed, which is that in contemporary painting, quote, positions are now multiple, simultaneous, and decentered, end quote, which are the very qualities that can describe diasporic consciousness. And in this sense, contemporary painting practices and diaspora consciousness can sort of be analogous. The exhibition has 27 artists who employ a staggering array of materials and strategies to traverse painting's incredibly rich terrain of possibilities and to push the boundaries of what painting is and can be. A concern in researching and selecting artists was to bring together works from a diversity of diasporic experiences, which manifest in a multifarious array of methodological, material, and aesthetic approaches. And I also wanted to acknowledge the diaspora experience across countries that experienced a major influx of people of color, as the realities of racialization add a significant dimension to the experience of living in and through difference, where questions of kinship are sought and redefined as strategies for survival. And since diasporas are everywhere and the contours of the experiences take on different shapes according to where they are located, I thought it was just important then to consider the Montreal context and to focus on artists operating in and sometimes between Canada, the United States, and Britain. The histories of imperialism and colonialist projects of nation building put forth these countries as critical contexts through which to contemplate the works on view. Another intention in regards to the selection of the artists was to assemble an intergenerational dialogue that would contribute to a sense of the harmonies and dissonances over time in regards to what a contemporary diasporic consciousness might be now. So, you know, you've got, we have two octogenarian artists, Yoko Ono and Frank Bowling, who were born in the 1930s. And then we have artists sort of like born in the, you know, every decade up until, you know, artists in their 30s. So it would be, so it's interesting to see how this, you know, their dialogue will come together, you know, in the show. Yeah. Low didactics and no categories. Yeah, so the no categories thing is, you know, to resist the temptation in an art historical and museal practices to create categories like, oh, okay, these artists do a lot of landscape, or these artists are doing portraiture. So we didn't do that. We just wanted to place works in a way where they could speak on their own terms. So there's no organization in that way of any kind. Low didactics. I've been trying to experiment with low to no didactics in the exhibition spaces as much as possible in order for people to have a really sort of guided, you know, visit, so that they really, you know, we really like it when visitors, when you just have an opportunity. I know I like this when I go to art museums, to just have an encounter and to be encouraged to read and to fight the pull of the didactic cartel, which I have a really hard time doing. And so what I was hoping was to have none. Maybe like there will be an introduction text, but no sort of texts about the works on the wall. My initial intention, and I'll talk about it in a second, was to have a publication that is made specifically for this show, which shares texts by an interdisciplinary group of amazing writers who will go more in depth with the works on view. And this is a publication that people would have been able to have access to in the spaces. But with COVID, we can't have, you know, we can't allow people to be touching things and other people touching things. So unfortunately, that idea had to be shelved. And but I still felt it important to give people some entry points into an artist's practice. So there are very short artist statements that will be on the wall, kind of away from the work. So you can have that moment of contemplation and your own reading, and, you know, commune. And if you would like to know a little bit more, there will be those sort of artist statements on the wall, but short, so you can keep it moving, you can keep it fluid. And what I'm really hoping is that we're going to have, we're going to have the sense of a polyphonic experience, you know, sort of many voices coming together. Edward Said has this fantastic quote. He suggested that living in and with more than one culture produces a, quote, plurality of vision, end quote, that gives rise to an awareness of simultaneous dimensions, an awareness that, to borrow a phrase from music, is contrapuntal. So I'm hoping that the strategy of a multiplicity of voices with all the joy, the tension, the struggle, um, the I guess the love, you know, across these many modes, many approaches, would allow for a polyphonic experience, and that the relations in and between these artists' works would elicit melodies and counter melodies that would accumulate as each is encountered, culminating in a complex Baroque fugue or jazz counterpoint. And that by adding our own melodic readings to the score, that we too would exercise the potential of the contrapuntal gaze. So here's a little sneak peek at the publication that will accompany the show eventually. It's going to be published by Hermer, and it will feature, it's like kind of a hybrid picture book, but also these wonderful essays. And the essays are written by a really incredible group of, like I was saying, sort of interdisciplinary selection of people who work in cultural theory, art history, who are curators, who are critics, who are poets, who write prose. So we really tried to also extend the multiplicity of voices to the those who were either chosen by the artist, or we suggested a pairing. There are a lot of Montreal writers here as well, which is really exciting. There's going to be a path. We're going to do a one-way path through the show. You will be able to reserve a timed entry, and you should have a lot of freedom and time to see the show, to visit it, and there'll be little surprises too in the first week. All right, so what I thought is to just give you a sneak peek. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to scroll through the works. Not all of them are in this little diaporama that I'm going to scroll through. And also keep in mind that they're not to scale, and really that it's going to be much more rewarding to come and see them in person, obviously, with painting being a direct experience. So I'm going to zip it, and then I'm going to just show you some images of works in the show. Just quickly to tell you about public program, we have a wonderful book club that has been, will have its first meeting on the 18th, tomorrow, and they're reading Octavia Butler's Kindred. And if you are interested, I'm sure you can still sign up. There's a really wonderful selection of books, and I believe there may be 4 books that are going to be part of this circle, this reading circle of diasporic fiction. We have an incredible workshop, artist workshop by Michael Sergil, a Montreal-based artist of Haitian heritage, un imaginaire commun, that was developed in collaboration with Daniel Fizet, who works for the Foundation, and it explores nursery rhymes, looks at the origins of these as well, and people will be invited to contribute nursery rhymes that are part of their cultural heritage, their diasporic heritage, perhaps. And there will also be a hands-on component, which has to do with the making of this particular type of fiber thread that can also be woven together. And it's totally brilliantly conceived for the COVID reality. So that will be something that people will be able to do in addition to sort of seeing the show and extending their experience. And then we're gonna have artist talks. Well, we're gonna have roundtables. What we're proposing to do is to have artists do artist talks that we're gonna record and make available through the website. Some of them may be pre-recorded, but I mean, some of them may have been recorded prior, you know, for another show perhaps. We just wanted to be able to offer people access to that without having to do too much of their own digging. And then to have roundtables. Because we have 27 artists, we are proposing to do 4 sets of roundtables where artists will be able to dialogue together, you know, talk together and talk to us about their work. Mediation, no tours, no problem. We're going to be offering video capsules that can be either viewed before the visit, after the visit, continuously throughout the run of the show, that are going to be organized by our educators, and they're going to be able to take works and go a little bit more deeply in terms of thematics that they've, you know, threads that they've taken out. Some are about myth, others are about painting. So that will be something that will be offered to us. And then when I say listen or interact, we have an audio guide, and it's also going to be a little more in depth this time, to offer people an opportunity to have a visit that they can listen to while they're doing the visit. Or you can actually interact with us. There will be, I think there's a chat. There will be a chat on our website that you can access through your phone, so that if you want to know more, or I think maybe even a phone number where you can talk to somebody on site if you want to dialogue more like in real time with us about the works. And there will be a Traces project. That's our participatory art project series. So you can also leave a trace of your own with us at the show. So that's the broad strokes of it all. You know, thank you for listening and for being open to having this introduction. I think it's actually a really great thing, you know, to be able to share with people before. And that way, when you come to see the show, you kind of have a little bit of some insight that may help you engage more deeply with the exhibition. So I'm going to stop sharing now and open it up to have a little chat session. If anyone wants to just jump in, feel free. I'm going to do the old speaker view. But yeah, if there's anyone who wants to share, or hi Alice, or you know, just anyone has interests. Oh, questions for me dans le chat. Ok, j'y vais au chat. Okay. Okay, thanks, Sabine. Okay, so I'm just going to read what you wrote, Thanks. I'm glad you're happy. I'm very happy to hear that you're excited by the selection and the variety of emotions. Um, uh, so this is you, Sabine. You're saying, as you said, diaspora is about emotional connection to homeland. What was your selection mode in finding those various artists? So that's Sabine from New York. What was my selection mode? Well, I think I mostly would go back to this idea of this multiplicity of voices. I mean, I'm very much inspired in my early training as a not even an artist yet, but someone really engaged with culture to never let a discourse settle. And in documentary film practice, for example, I was very influenced by the feminist studio at the National Film Board of Canada, which put me in touch with other Indigenous women and women of color artists working in video who were really adopting this way of bringing various women together across class, sexual orientation around a particular subject, so that they might have to reveal divergent points of view. And I thought that was really courageous. I thought it showed a real engagement, with understanding there's always a complexity to a story, that we can never distill it down to a so-called essence. And so it was with that, perhaps with that kind of mode of address, that I went into kind of selecting. It's really difficult. Having said that, it's really difficult to make those selections and to be limited, by physical constraints as well. Because this is absolutely by no means, way, shape, or form a kind of exhaustive. No, by no means exhaustive. And it's just an opportunity to open up more discussion and discover new artists, and also pay homage to artists who've been working through these kinds of questions for a very, very long time. So I also, I guess, was interested in that continuity. So artists like Frank Bowling, for example, or Lubaina Hamid, who've been very central. Maybe Lubaina even more so, given her work in England, to make sure that Black women artists were recognized. So it was a desire to see the long game as well, and to pay homage to the pioneers, these people who have been addressing these questions in their work. And to see its evolution as well. There are a lot of thematics that kind of do bubble through time. And so that gives us a really interesting way of understanding where we're at. Okay, thanks again, Sabine. So from El Saint-Pierre, will there be any kind of opening? It looks like a fantastic exhibition, especially the fact that it seems you are taking a very large view of what painting can be. Okay, so thanks. There won't be an actual vernissage, obviously. We're not allowed to do that, but we are doing something special for the first week. So maybe we'll come down the first week. I can't say anything more. We definitely, I guess there is a kind of there will be a celebratory feel, I think, that we can actually be together in a space and appreciate art together, Otherwise, yeah, the very large view of what painting can be. There's a work by Jordan Nassar in the show where he uses embroidery. He's looking at specifically patterns that are made by a particular community of women in Palestine. He was born and raised in New York, so he, is very much diaspora in that sense of kind of like wanting to have a sense of his own Palestinian heritage. But also embroidery is painting with the needle. I thought was interesting. He's also very much interested in landscape as well. So there's a lot of those layers that come together in the work. And then also Yinka Shonobare, CRE, is presenting a quilt work. So, you know, sort of painting with textile, painting with, you know, he's also working with the Mappa Mundi, the Hereford Mappa Mundi as a text through which to explore hybridity and the kind of simultaneity that exists in the diaspora experience. So that's another kind of departure from what would be classically understood as painting. And there are also a few artists like Kamruz Aram who have objects, sort of sculptural objects that are part of the painting proposal. And Jinny Yu, who's of Korean heritage, grew up in Montreal and now lives in Ottawa, is sort of taking painting off the wall. And her works are those sort of glass panels that are placed on the floor. The piece is called Perpetual Guest, and she's the one artist that is also looking at diaspora and indigenous discourses together. A very, very courageous work, and I'm really interested to see how that shapes up as a discussion that we can have. You know, whereas indigenous people are very much connected with the land, very much connected with territory, right? With, you know, and the fact that we're unceded territory. So she addresses that in her piece and sort of sees herself as the perpetual guest because she's an immigrant to Canada, and yet at the same time she's very much Canadian, but at the same time she's, you know, she respects, you know, the indigenous position on territory and land claims. So it's like a very, yeah, you know, like where do we situate ourselves within these discussions? Lisette. Merci pour la question, Lisette. Je le lis. Est-ce que vos initiatives liées à l'absence de visite guidée sont une solution temporaire due au contexte sanitaire ou est-ce une nouvelle façon de voir la médiation? Wow, c'est une super bonne question. En fait, ça nous donne, je dirais que c'est comme tout le monde a constaté, on trouve d'autres moyens de faire les choses qui, dans le fond, on trouve que c'est en fait une nouvelle façon de faire les choses qu'on devrait instaurer de manière permanente. Dorénavant, on devrait faire les capsules. Peut-être il y a différentes portes d'entrée qu'on peut offrir aux gens. I think it's like everybody should have different ways of getting into the show. And whether it's the capsule, whether it's reading, whether it's nothing, whether it's listening, si ça rajoute un autre niveau d'engagement avec les œuvres. So this could very well be la nouvelle façon de voir la médiation, effectivement. Ou un rajout. C'est parce que les visites guidées sont aussi vraiment très précieuses. Parce que nos visites, c'est vraiment une discussion. It's a walk and talk. Well, any other burning questions or even just comments? If there are any visitor experience coordinators here that are part of the discussion, I would love to, you know, be able to open up the floor to your thoughts as you've been engaging a little bit more with these works. And of course, anything at all. I think what we're going to find is that we're going to have other ways, you know, to engage with art and using our senses in a different way. Oh, merci, Lisette. Oh, Sabine, could you talk, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but could you talk a little bit about how this thematic is important to your organization? I'm just curious, since we have, you know, a little bit of time, I would be interested to know a bit more.
I unmute, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't want to bother you and to take so much time. Well, my organization is with the News 3 Plus as a platform which is connecting artists, creative makers, and creative technologists. So we have an ecosystem based on New York City, Montreal, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. And for us, it's really about putting, you know, artists and creative makers on the spotlight when it comes about expressing their art with corporation organizations. So it could be for all kinds of industries. And we are discovering since the COVID that there's going on this unseen transformation. So, you know, everybody, you know, is isolated, we're home, and the artists are, you know, gathering their inspiration by the environment, but the environment is so kind of, you know, uncertain now. So we discovered that it's a lot lately since the 3 months, a lot of discussion around emotion and feeling. And we discovered that the fact that people are, you know, far from home and, you know, disconnected from their homeland and from the time and everything, that emotion is really, really important, and feeling as well. So this is why I was really interested about, because you were talking about, you know, emotions also, you know, for the diaspora. So this is why I was really interested about how do you make a selection, you know, in this thematic, and also based on emotion and nationalities and feelings. So I understand that, I mean, the selection was made before the COVID, but if you would have to do this selection now that we have the COVID, would you change your way to select the artists, or would you stick with the selection mode you had before the COVID? Does that make sense to you as a question?
Kind of. I mean, I don't think I would probably change my my mode, you know, in terms of, you know, your original question. I think that would be the same. What would be tricky, you know, is that when you're organizing an exhibition with a lot of artists, it's I still feel it's important to connect with the artists, right? I mean, in a meaningful way, and that we really have a good chat about their work, and that might have been difficult to do. And perhaps unfulfilling, and that would have been, we would have had to find different ways. And also because what I have noticed too is uh, during COVID, I did one studio visit anyway, with just to see an artist's work in progress. And it was an incredibly emotional moment to be encountering their work in person, especially after having been in lockdown for, at that point, 2 months.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it would have been a really difficult process, I think, otherwise. So I feel really grateful that we got it done before.
Yeah, because we really can feel that the artists, to them, it's a really, I mean, in the US specifically, because there's absolutely no safety net for the artists in the US, nothing. And so we are really listening to the artist and the creative maker, that emotion is really on edge, or really creative, or really, you know, it's, you have all kinds of emotion and feeling at that point. So this is why I was really interesting about the topic.
Thanks so much, Sabine. Thank you. Well, I really want to thank you all. Ah oui, peut-être à l'automne, j'amènerai mes étudiants. Oui, ce sont des immigrants. Oui, ça serait avec grand plaisir, Sylvie. If we're allowed to, and we'll see what happens, en termes de, tu sais, les mesures, on verra si on peut bien avoir des groupes, mais si des petits groupes, on va trouver une solution.
And for the American, we're trapped on the other side of the border. How's that going to work?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, we could have good news by the end of July. You may be coming back to Montreal for a visit, so we'll see.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I really enjoyed being able to share this with you, and I'm looking forward to, you know, discussing any way we can, right? We've gotten very creative. On trouve des solutions. connexion. Ça, c'est la chose qui nous rend plus forts. Hein. Donc, je vous remercie encore une fois. Puis, n'hésitez pas si vous avez des questions ou commentaires à un autre moment ou vous voulez me contacter par le site web de la Fondation. C'est un grand plaisir de discuter avec vous. Merci, Dalia, aussi. Merci beaucoup pour ton aide. Merci pour votre présence. Et on vous retrouve bientôt.